Greetings, colleagues. Getting ready for your exams? What is the best way to get ready? How to prepare for an exam? Well, I've graded thousands of university exams. Let me share with you what I have learned as a professor coming up with exams, writing exams, and grading exams. I will point out common mistakes and give you useful strategies and tips that will help get a better score. Remember, each exam has two parts. It tests your knowledge of the material, but also your knowledge about the exam or how to take an exam. Let's jump into it. As a professor, I taught over 1,000 students at the bachelor and master level, business students and law students, and some other students as well. And I learned a lot by grading the exams and, of course, writing the exams. And so let me share with you some of the tips and strategies and observations that I've learned by grading these exams. And also some of these strategies and tips I learned when I was a student. And then I saw as a professor, wow, that really makes sense. That's a good strategy. That's a good tip. So not all of these are original to me, but I've seen these in action, so to speak. So these are some great strategies and tips to improve your grade on any exam. Now, of course, it helps to know the material. You need to put some time studying the material, understanding whatever the course material is, whatever the subject of the course is. But even if you do that, there's things that you can do that help you get a better score. Or if you don't understand how the exam operates, you might get a worse score. Even though your knowledge of the material is high, you don't understand the exam, you might get a lower score because of that. We don't want that to happen. So let's jump into it. If you are writing the exam, in other words, you're not using a computer, write big. Some of us have bad handwriting. Myself, I'm at the top of the list. So I understand if you have bad handwriting. But you do need to pay attention if you're writing an essay, for example. So one of the things that'll help is to write big, so that it's easier to read what you wrote. A lot of the exams that I graded were actually scanned. So the students wrote it out and then it was scanned, then I looked at it on my computer. And sometimes the print was so small, I had to zoom in as much as I could, and even then it was difficult to read. So make sure that you write big, leave some space in between your lines, and use up that space. Most universities will give you plenty of paper, so don't worry about using extra paper. Not when you're writing an exam. Save paper later, but during the exam, try to write big so it's very legible. If it's not legible, how can the professor give you credit for what you wrote? Even if it's pure gold, if they can't read it, guess what? It's not gold. It's almost worthless. So write legibly and try to write big. And leave space in between lines. If you're writing on a blank page, they're not giving you like a pre-formatted form to fill out, then each section might be on a new page, or at the very least, leave a gap in between the sections so that it's clear, oh yeah, this is section 1, this is section 2, this is section 3, that sort of thing. Think about it this way. You don't want your professor to have to hunt and peck to find out, gee, where is question 1, where is question 5, where is section 3? And if you do it, and if it's difficult to find it, there's always a chance that they might skip it. They might think you didn't complete a section, and so you end up getting a 0 for that section. So it should be clear, especially for the sections, where the section begins and ends. Before answering a question, make sure that you understand the question asked and that you answer the question asked. This is true for essays or even short answers. A lot of times students will read it, and I think that they read it too quickly, and they think they know what the question is, but they don't understand what the question is. Kind of like a game show where the contestant hits the buzzer before the announcer finishes the question. They anticipate what the rest of the question is, so they answer it because they know the answer to that. But unfortunately, the announcer was going to ask a different question. And maybe they would have known the answer to that question too, but they didn't bother listening to it, or sometimes students don't bother really reading or understanding the question. They just answer a different question, and there's only so many points the professor can give you credit for. So make sure that you understand the question asked. That is, reread it a couple of times. If there's words there that are kind of tricky or you're not quite sure that you understand, take a moment, make sure that you understand that question as best as you can. And then when you come up with your answer, make sure it answers that question. So I see a lot of students, instead of answering it directly, they kind of go at an angle. They answer kind of, but they're kind of answering a different question. Again, there's only so many points you can get because of that. So make sure that you understand the question and you answer the question. Not the question you want to answer, but the question that's actually being asked. On most exams, there are some standardized tests where this is bad advice, but on most exams, especially most university exams, don't leave a blank question. If it's an objective question, guess. Don't leave a blank answer. You don't lose any points for wrong answers. Now, obviously, if this is multiple choice, even if you guess, if there's 4 options, A, B, C, D, and you guess A on all of them, at least you should get 25% of the grade. Now, hopefully you'll be able to do better than that. I'm not suggesting that you just guess like that. But if you're not sure what the answer is, at least guess. Even if you have to fill in the blank, it's not 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5. It's 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of a million. At least take a guess. You're not going to lose any points for wrong answers. If one section of the exam has objective questions, maybe it's multiple choice or there's just a short answer, 1 word, something like that. It's either right or it's wrong. There's no gradation in between. It's the right answer or it's the wrong answer. When you read the question, think about the question. Make sure you understand the question. But if you think you know the answer, then write down the answer. Now, if there's multiple choice, think about the answer before you look at the options. And then if your option is there, then circle that option, choose that option. Or if maybe there's a word bank or something like that, think about the answer, then look at the word bank. If it's there, then okay, be satisfied that's the right answer. Write down your answer, never look at that question again. I've heard this when I was a student, that if you answer a question, then you go back and you change the answer, you're more likely to take a correct answer into a wrong answer. And I've seen that so many times. So many times if I had a multiple choice or a word bank, something like that, that if an answer was written and then crossed out, a new answer was put down, most of the time it was a right answer that became a wrong answer. So if you think you know the answer, write it down. You're done with that question. Never look at it again. Now maybe you read the question, you're not sure of the answer. You think, oh, okay, maybe there's 4 options or something like that. You can try to narrow it down, process of elimination. I know it's not A. I'm pretty sure it's not D. Okay, so it's B or C, and then try to narrow it down as much as you can. Now, maybe you're going to take a guess, or maybe just circle that question and go back to it. Don't spend a lot of time on it the first time. Think about it, maybe cross out the answers that are wrong, but come back to it, circle it, mark it in your scratch paper, but go to the next question. Don't spend too much time on any one question in that type of objective questions, on that type of section with objective questions. And then go through it, and maybe there's 20 or 30 questions in that section, and maybe you answer half of them or 2/3 of them. Now for those questions, you're not going to look at them again. It doesn't matter if you have 30 minutes left at the end of the exam, don't look at those questions. However, you still have some questions left. Now look at those again. Now sometimes, just by answering the rest of the questions, sometimes your memory is jogged. Like another question brings up something that you forgot. So when you go back to that question, oh yeah, I remember now. And when you're writing the questions, I have to bring up some of the material when I'm writing other questions. If you're writing, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 questions, some of the material is going to come up in the other questions. It might jog your memory. So, good thing you didn't answer it yet, or you marked it that you're not sure of the answer. So when you go back to it the second time, maybe you get the right answer. Now, so go through it again. Now, maybe you had half or a third of the questions you hadn't answered. Round two, go through those. And maybe you get rid of half of those. Maybe take a break, maybe go to the next section, come back to it. If you can, that's great. But then go through round three, go through the ones you didn't answer, and then keep doing that until you've satisfied this is the best answer I can come up with. Through process of elimination, get rid of some wrong answers, and then choose the best possible answer, and then move on. That's probably the best way to take these objective questions. Hopefully you're getting something out of this video. If you are, then let's conquer that like button and make it ours. Tell me in the comments below, what is the most difficult part of taking an exam for you? Is it the essay writing, some objective questions? What is the most difficult part of an exam for you? For essay questions, remember an essay should be well organized. A lot of times students will kind of go stream of consciousness where they're just thinking about different things and they're going all over the place. I'm sure you have friends that talk like that. And sometimes it's interesting to listen to people like that, but most of the time it's not, because you have no idea what they're talking about. Wait a second, are you talking about this, or are you talking about this other thing, or are you on a totally different topic? What are you talking about? And so the same thing when you're reading an essay. If it's going all over the place, it's not fun to read, and people don't understand exactly what you're saying. What points are you trying to make? You want your essay to be well organized. A lot of students lose points because of this. Take some time, make sure that it's organized. And then you want to use facts or details to support your arguments. If you're saying, this is the best, well, okay, but why? How are you going to support that? This is the best because of A, B, and C. Have details that support that conclusion or that argument. The professor doesn't want to just take your word for it. Have some data, some details, some examples that support your argument, and make sure that it's clear. And the essay is a chance, really the whole exam is a chance to demonstrate your mastery of the course material. So for example, if you're thinking about details that are going to support your argument in the essay, sometimes using your own life can be good. But if you have examples from the textbook, from the required readings or the additional readings, use those examples. That shows that you've mastered this course material. You've read the material, you understand the material, and you can apply it to questions about this course, about this material. So sometimes it may be good to have your own real-life examples. That can be good for some questions. However, for the most part, you want to use the course material to answer those questions. Use those details. And if you did read the material, you did understand the material, why not show that off? Show off to the professor that you understood this, that you read this, and that you remember it. This is your chance in these essay questions. And make sure that you answer the question. You want to address all the issues raised. In other words, don't leave points on the table. If they ask you about A, B, and C, you want to answer A, you want to answer B, you want to answer C. Now, that doesn't mean that they are equal questions. Maybe A is a big question, B is a medium question, and C is a very small question. Maybe you just need it in one sentence. It doesn't mean that A, B, and C are equal. However, you want to make sure that you answer each of those points, each of those issues. Otherwise, you might lose points. You're leaving those points on the table. Wow, they answered A perfectly, but they never addressed B, they never addressed C, so they're going to get docked some points because of that. Answer the entire question and address all of the issues raised. Make sure that you have an intro and a conclusion in your essay. Your intro should explain what you're going to write about and identifies your main arguments. You're not writing a murder mystery, a whodunit, where they have to wait till the end to figure out what you're arguing or what you're going to say. You want to put roadmap, a signpost right in the introduction, So the reader, you're the grader, the professor knows exactly what arguments you're going to make in the organization or the structure of your essay. That should be very clear from the introduction. And remember, each paragraph has one main idea. So your essay has to be composed of paragraphs. Often a short essay is going to be 4 or 5 paragraphs. If it's a longer essay, it's going to be longer. But you want to make sure that it's structured into these paragraphs. Make sure it's clear. When does this paragraph begin and end? Normally I would suggest indent the first line of the paragraph and leave a blank space in between the end of the paragraph and the next paragraph. So it's very clear. This paragraph begins here and ends here. I've had students write, I'm not kidding, 3-page paragraphs. That's terrible to read. It's very difficult to follow. And maybe they intended that there being a few paragraphs in there. I don't know, but I couldn't tell where one paragraph ended and the next one began. So it is very difficult to read. And remember, each paragraph has one main idea. So generally, it doesn't have to be this way, but this is a good way to do it. The first sentence in a paragraph is the topic sentence. It has kind of an argument or an explanation, and the rest of the paragraph is going to support that argument. It's going to provide details or explanations that support that argument from the topic sentence. If it doesn't, then that sentence really doesn't belong in that paragraph. You have to decide, maybe it goes into another paragraph, or maybe you don't need it at all, but it doesn't belong in that paragraph if it doesn't support the topic sentence. So keep that in mind when you're writing. I highly recommend before you start writing that you sketch a quick outline. I'll put up an outline here. So here's what an outline looks like. You can see it's got an intro and a conclusion. And when I do an outline, that's probably all I'm going to put for those. So each of these Roman numerals is one paragraph. So the intro, the conclusion, every time you're going to include those. But you probably don't need to put any more detail in the outline than just intro and conclusion. Now, you're going to have, like I said, 2, 3, maybe even more main body paragraphs or main arguments. In each of those main arguments is going to have, I would say, at least 3 supporting ideas. It may have more, that's fine. But each of those supporting ideas is probably going to be a sentence. Maybe there's 2 sentences. Sometimes I might have, maybe I have a lot of details, but I'm just going to put them in 1 or 2 sentences. I'm going to have a few details in each. That could be fine depending on what the essay is about. But normally each supporting ideas is probably its own sentence, roughly. If you're not familiar with an outline, outlines can be intimidating and they can be difficult to adopt. However, once you kind of figure out how to use an outline is very, very useful for whatever writing that you'll do. You're not going to use it just for university exams. You can use it the rest of your life. Outlines are very useful, and maybe I need to put a video about that, but outlines are great to use. Remember, you have an introduction paragraph, you have a conclusion paragraph, and then you probably have some main body paragraphs, 2, 3, maybe even more if it's a longer essay. But those main body paragraphs, that's what you're making your main arguments. Now, in the outline, you want to identify what are those main arguments. Now, if you can't identify the main points that you want to make, do you think the professor is going to be able to figure it out? So you need to be very clear. What main points do you want to make? What are your main arguments in this essay? And then each paragraph starts out with that topic sentence that makes that argument. And then the rest of the sentences in that paragraph support it. They provide details, explanations, or examples that make that topic sentence even stronger, the arguments from that topic sentence even more believable. That's how we structure the essay. Now, when you first read the essay question, If you don't understand the question, you're feeling lost, don't jump in and start writing because the writing is going to be terrible. Take a few minutes to understand that question as best as you can. And then organization, start the outline, come up with the main points that you want to make, the main points that you want to argue in that essay. And then think of the supporting details, the examples that support those arguments. Then start writing. Then when you start writing, it's much easier to do the writing because you know what you're going to write about. Another mistake I see some students making is fluff sentences. What is a fluff sentence? It is a sentence that adds nothing to the essay. Don't waste your time writing sentences that don't say anything or add anything to the argument. Maybe it is something that just restates what you said in the sentence before or a couple of sentences before, or maybe it just says something that doesn't matter. For instance, if you say, that's an interesting question. This essay question asked me to do this. That's a very fascinating question. Don't try to stroke my ego. If I wrote the question, of course I think it's fascinating, but you don't need to say it like that. There's no point in it. It doesn't add anything. So be careful when you add these fluff sentences. Think about it this way. If you could cross out this sentence and take it out of the essay, if nothing changes, that's a fluff sentence. It doesn't need to be there. Another mistake I often see is sentence fragments, where it's not an independent clause. It's just kind of a phrase or a few ideas, but it's not a complete sentence. And often this is not like a language issue. It is really proofreading or editing issue. You wrote down something and maybe when you're writing it, you thought that it was a complete sentence and you never went back to check like, oh wow, I forgot the subject and the verb of that sentence, or I started to write it but I never finished it. So there's something wrong with that sentence or that fragment of a sentence, that part of a sentence. When you go back to edit and proofread, look for that, make sure every sentence is complete. It's not missing something. And also, don't use bullet points in essays. If you're writing an email, a memo, or something like that, bullet points are great. I use bullet points a lot. But in an essay, your instructor is asking you to write. So therefore, write. Don't use bullet points. So unless your professor or your lecturer says otherwise, don't use bullet points in your essay. Write it out. Also, emojis. I shouldn't see any emojis in academic writing. So forget about emojis, just write out your thoughts. Abbreviations or acronyms. Usually your essay is kind of short writing. You probably don't need to use a lot of abbreviations or acronyms, just write it out. However, if you're going to use the term again and again, it may be useful to write it out. So if you're going to do that, make sure that you understand how to do that. So when writing something for the first time, write it out. And then in parentheses, put quotation marks around the acronym, around the abbreviation. Then the next time you use it, you can just use the abbreviation. So write it out the first time that you use it. After that, just use that abbreviation. That's not a problem. And if it's something that you're going to use again and again, just by the nature of the question, what the subject is, that's a very good way to do it. You're not wasting your time writing the same 2 or 3 words again and again. So just make sure that you set it up the first time correctly. And in formal writing, don't use contractions. So we say I am, not I'm, cannot, not can't, that sort of thing. In normal English, of course, everyday English, contractions are great. Sometimes in IELTS or TOEFL, they actually look, are you using contractions? But in academic writing, we don't use contractions. We try to be more formal. Another thing to do is think about informal words, such as got or but. You may be using them correctly, there's nothing wrong grammatically, but those are kind of informal words. Those are maybe one-point words. But when you're writing for academic writing or formal writing, try to use more formal words, such as receive. He got an A, he received an A. you know, but this was not the best. However, this was not the best. You know, receive, however, there's lots of other words that you can use instead of got or but. And this is something that you can check when you're proofreading, when you're editing your essay. If there's a kind of a simple word, a one point word that you've used, can you take it out and put in a more formal word, a more academic word? Take out that 1 point word and put in a 5 point or a 7 point word. That's a great way to level up your writing. Also, avoid rhetorical questions. So this is a rhetorical question is when someone asks a question, but they don't expect an answer. Now, in speech making, in conversation, rhetorical questions can be very effective. That's fine. But in academic writing, I don't really like rhetorical questions. I don't think that they land very well. And it kind of shows more of an informal writing style than I think is appropriate for academic writing. Now, some professors may have a different viewpoint on that, so that's fine, but I would suggest that you avoid rhetorical questions in your exams or any type of academic writing. In other words, you shouldn't be asking questions in an exam answer, you shouldn't be answering them. So keep that in mind. Time management is an important part of any exam. When you start the exam, or maybe even before you take the exam, you should have an idea. I want to spend, X amount of minutes on section 1, X amount of minutes on section 2, X amount of minutes on section 3. Normally the professor will give you the heads up, how many questions, how many points they're worth, that sort of thing. Hopefully you'll have an idea before you even start the exam how much time you want to spend on each. For the essays, I even divide that into thirds. So if let's say I have an hour to write this essay, I might think, okay, I want to spend so much on the organization. I want to spend so much on writing, and then I want to spend so much on editing. And a lot of time, people spend the most time on that middle, the writing part. I think that's a mistake. You want to spend a good amount of time on the organization. Make sure that you understand the question, that you have a good outline, you've thought about what you're going to write before you start writing. Then your writing is going to be much better. It's going to be much more organized. You're not going to forget things. Like, it's very common, like, oh yeah, I want to talk about A, B, and C. Those are great points. But then when you start writing it, oh, I got A and C. What was the other one? I think there was one more. What was that? But if you have it in your outline, you're not going to forget it when you need it. So organization is very important. In the writing, you want to get through quickly, because when you finish that first draft, you want to have time to proofread it, to edit it, to make it better, to level it up. So save time for that. And I recommend that after you complete your essay, that you pause, take a deep breath, take a 30, 60-second break. You don't have a long time, but take a little break. If you can, look out the window, something like that. Don't look at other students' exams, of course, but try to look out the window for 30, 60 seconds, then proofread. Because even having this little bit of a break, separates you from the writing that you just wrote. And you might notice things that you didn't notice because you're so close to it. If you're writing a report for a class, you might finish that first draft and then put it away, come back the next day and proofread it. That's great. You can't do that during an exam, but by taking 30 or 60 seconds, it is helpful. Take a little bit of a distance, then proofread. And proofreading, editing, that's where you take your, kind of rough first draft and make it into a good essay that you're going to get more points for. What do you want to look for? Like I said, make sure that you have complete sentences. You didn't forget something. You have the correct tense, the correct verb. You have subject-verb agreement. I sit, she sits, they sit. Don't mix up the conjugation of the verb. Make sure there's no missing words. I can't tell you how many essays I've read where the student starts out in the introduction where, I think this is a good idea. Then the rest of the essay is, it's not a good idea. So they forgot not in the introduction. Well, think about it this way. the most important word in that sentence was probably the not, right? It actually changes the whole meaning of the sentence. They forgot the most important word in that sentence. So check for that, look for that. And it's very common when you're writing or sometimes typing, your mind is going faster than your fingers. So you're thinking 5 words ahead, but when you get to the writing or typing that word, your fingers forget about that word and just go to the 6th word. They go to the next word. And then you don't notice it because you're so close to that sentence that you don't notice there's a word missing. So pay attention to that. It happens more often than you think. Also look for, is your point clear? Again, you're trying to make a point. Is it obvious what that point is? Is your writing legible? If you can't read it, chances are I can't read it. Did you follow your outline? Now, when you're writing, maybe you need to change your outline. You realize this isn't working, that's fine, if that's your decision. But if you came up with an outline and then when you wrote, you just didn't follow the outline, that's probably a problem. Think about, why didn't I follow the outline? Is the writing better or worse than the outline? You have to kind of think about that. And also, did you answer the question? If the question asked you this way, did you go off on a tangent? Did you go off in a different direction? Maybe you wrote a great essay, but it doesn't answer the question the professor gave you. That's a problem. So make sure that you answered the question that was asked. And also, is there logical connections? So in other words, you have to connect the dots. I think this is my conclusion, but how do I get there? I got to go from A to B to C to D. If you go from A to B to D, like, wait a second, I see how you got here, but how the heck did you get all the way over here? You're missing one of the dots. So this often happens because you know exactly the points that you want to make. It's very clear to you. But to an outsider, it may not be clear. And so sometimes, when I read exams, I might see, oh, they forgot to explain this, they forgot to say this. I understand what you're saying, but I notice something is missing. Other times, I don't know what you're trying to say. Like, gee, why? What happened here? This made sense, but then you're over here. How did you make that jump? So it's not always clear. So you want to make sure all of those dots are connected. Some common mistakes that I've seen in a lot of exams: the answer did not address many of the issues suggested by the question. So you have to think, what issues does this question raise? Now, sometimes I've written essay questions where I had a lot of kind of like sub-questions, tell me about A, B, C, and D. Other times I just left it open, and tried to see what was better for the students, which ones I got better answers for. And different professors have different styles. But sometimes a question may not mention it, sometimes it does. But the question brings up this other issue. It begs the question of this. You make sure that you have to address that, talk about that. Otherwise, you're missing something in your answer. Another mistake I see frequently: some issues should have been developed further. So you bring up a point, like, wow, that's a great point, but you just mention it in a sentence that mentions 3 points. This point, maybe it should have been its own paragraph. There's lots of information I would have loved to have seen. And this is especially true, of course, when you have short answers. I think a lot of professors don't necessarily have like a word count or something like that you need to get. But I see a lot of students making this mistake, which brings us to our next common mistake. The question was worth more than other questions, yet you wrote a shorter answer. So for example, I might have 2 essay questions. One is worth 20 points, one is worth 40 points. In a lot of exams that I've graded, the 20-point question had a longer answer than the 40-point question. Does that make sense to you? Of course not. Now, I'm not saying that the longer it is, the more points you're going to get. Like I said, there's lots of fluff. The fluff doesn't count for anything. But all things being equal, the 40-point question should have an answer roughly twice the size of a 20-point question. It doesn't have to be exactly that. Sometimes you have a lot more to say in the 20. That's fine. Maybe you don't have as much to say in the 40, but that's probably going to be a problem. You should take that into account. How long should this answer be? How long or how many points is the question worth? keep that in mind. And so I've seen a lot of essays where they brought up a good topic, but it was too short. I wanted to hear more about that topic. They should have developed that more, but they didn't. Another common mistake, misunderstandings. I asked about something and they didn't understand it completely. They didn't understand the question. And of course, sometimes this might be a language issue, but I once taught a course on human rights, commonly abbreviated HR. And in one of my questions, I think it was a short answer, question. It wasn't a full essay, but one of the questions had something about HR. It asked about HR, and the answer wrote about human resources. Now, at first I was like, wait, is that my fault or is that the student's fault? But, even at the top of the exam, it had, human rights, in the title. So I think that they should have known HR in this context meant human rights, not human resources, which was not something we talked about in the class at all. So you want to make sure that you understand the question, that there's no misunderstandings. Well organized or poorly organized. It's a huge difference. Is the essay well organized? The potential for points is high. If it's poorly organized, even if you have some good stuff in there, you're going to be heavily penalized because of that. Another common mistake, a student did not give examples or facts to support their argument. Maybe they made the right arguments. The arguments were good, but they didn't have any details to support it. And especially from the course materials. This is what you want to show, that you've mastered the course material, that you've read the assignments, you've read the reading assignments, the case studies, whatever it is. And so you're using that when you're coming up with your answers. All right, time to keep learning. The next video is about one powerful way to improve your speaking skills. Check out that video now. Work hard today and enjoy tomorrow.